Call of Duty's finally addressing matchmaking, and it is a pretty long blog, and we're not going to go ahead and read line by line. I will link in the description if you want to go ahead and read every detail, but I did want to focus on a key elements here that it discusses, so we can kind of address some of those, and it even clears up some misconceptions. But for the most part, matchmaking does what you expect it to do, which is to help lower skilled players win more often than they would otherwise, and to make good players or better players lose more often than they would regularly. What we'll go through is they talk about their different pillars of matchmaking here: connection, time to match, skill performance, platform, voice chat, which is a new one. We never even really considered that one, input device, recent maps, and then playlist diversity. So if you're selecting a specific set of modes, you kind of expect that that's how that's going to work. The main two I'll focus on here in this section is connection and time to match. These other ones are pretty much self-explanatory. The connection says that the ping is king, that the community is the most critical and heavily weighted factor in matchmaking. So this is saying that this is the main focus. Anecdotally and from testing different things, that this doesn't always feel to be the case. There are plenty of times when I play, I live near LA, close enough where I should have between 12 and 20 ping at the most. If the ping was the main factor, the first factor, I would always get into a 20 ping lobby or less. Obviously, depending on where you live in the world, where your region is, how close you are to servers, your number would vary. But I should never, based off of this and my understanding of it, I should never connect to Central, and I should never connect to the East Coast. I should never connect to Europe, Japan, wherever the case is. Regardless of time of day, it should connect me to a lobby with at least 11 other players. If I live near LA, I should get an LA-based lobby, but that doesn't happen. There are other factors that are weighted. Time to match, so the factor, the second most critical. They don't want you to wait too long. And again, I don't know how truthful that is because I've popped plenty of double XP tokens and I wouldn't even normally notice how long matchmaking is. When they made the previous Call of Duties backwards compatible, I jumped on a bunch of Call of Duties. We streamed a bunch of them. Matchmaking's like this. You get into the lobby almost instantaneously. You're able to fire the gun in like 30 seconds. There's plenty of clips on this that show the disparity between prior to 2019 and then 2019 and after, where there is much longer wait times. I think there is obviously a trend to get you staring in the lobby a little bit longer so you can tab over to the store, maybe buy something when you're bored. I don't know what the threshold they consider is a long time or a short time. I just know that when I pop a double XP token, by the time I get in the match, I've already wasted probably 3 to 5 minutes, depending on what I'm queuing up for, which is way longer than it used to be. So how could that be the second? I have no clue. And then obviously, like I said, I'm not going to go deep dive in these. Obviously, if you select kill confirmed, you're going to play that. Those are obviously factors that impact matchmaking. You're not going to get queued up in S&D when you queue up for shipment. That's how it works. And then obviously skill, how good a player is, how often they're winning, input device, whether you play on controller or keyboard or mouse, platform, whether you're on console or you're on PC, and then voice chat if you have it enabled or disabled. This is, like I said, one I hadn't factored, but all those factors are pretty important. The matchmaking process evaluates metrics we call delta ping, which is the difference in round trip time from the data between your best data center, which should be LA for me, then you're almost always the closest one to you. It should always be the closest one to me. If there are enough players that live near the LA area, that is the server that you should connect to, it should be always. Obviously in less populated areas, it might make sense that it sends you over to a further server. Maybe it would be Northern California, maybe further, maybe to Texas. If there wasn't really a big population in California, but there is. It's one of the highest populated places for Call of Duty players. Texas is the other, New York is the other, and obviously in Europe and other countries, you do have other various regions, but those are kind of like the main hubs of where Call of Duty players are because the populations are so large. So I should always get that, but that doesn't. To reiterate, we always try to maximize the times we place players in data centers that are the closest to them. So it kind of tries to find me a lobby. That was the first factor, and then it runs through the other factors, it sounds like. And if it can't find me a lobby, it's going to bump me up to the next one that is still considered acceptable, which, in my opinion, that's just kind of circumventing the whole point of this one being first. If this one's first, make it first. Like, it's that simple. Actually make it first because there's plenty of proof. Even when we did a skill-based matchmaking testing on low and high skilled accounts, there was a variance of ping, and pretty much always the higher skilled account that we tested on with Exclusive Ace and Drifter, almost exclusively, the ping was higher. Even though it was marginal, it was higher on the higher KD account. Measuring the time for matchmaking. If you wait in a time in lobby excessively long, players typically recycle the process by canceling out matchmaking search, restarting, or even quitting. this does not quicken the matchmaking process. And in fact, it restarts because you're basically getting into another queue, which that makes sense. It's not gonna be faster, but you can definitely lobby shop. If you're trying to do long shots, you don't want the small map. And if you're trying to do point blanks, you don't want the big map. And here's where it gets really interesting. I think this along with the Q&A section or most commonly asked questions are probably the most important parts of this, because most of the stuff we kind of already expected to know. It says Call of Duty has historically considered player performance, even going back to the original Modern Warfare in 2007. And over time, they've refined this and improved it, as well as plenty of other games on the market. Plus, players get better. There's more intel. There's more guides and tips and stuff like that. So you do expect players to change, and they got to change their algorithms over time. Also, player behaviors change over time, because back in the day, you could actually get somebody on your lobby or on the opponent's team. They go like 2-40. They weren't backing out of lobbies. But now, maybe they do, because it's a different environment. People are a little bit softer in certain areas that way, where if they are getting dumpstered, they'll just stop playing the game and they'll move on to something else. So the main part here, it says our data on player outcomes. So outcomes are usually wins, losses, not necessarily KD. Our data on player outcomes clearly indicates that the inclusion of skill in Call of Duty's multiplayer matchmaking process, as it currently stands, increases variety of outcomes experienced by players on all skill levels. So what this one's kind of like dumbed down for anyone that didn't make sense to you, because it is a lot of verbiage. Essentially, if you win a lot, that's not enough variance. So they want to throw you some losses in there, and they're going to go ahead and make the matchmaking balance out so that the opponent's team is better than your team, so that you're going to incur a loss, because they don't want you to win all the time. And vice versa, if you're on the losing end and you're just not particularly good and you're losing a bunch, they're going to stack the deck so you get a win. And they want to go ahead and increase that variability, because winning too much, I guess, would be a bad thing, and losing too much would be a bad thing. So that makes sense. At least they're telling us plain as day. They're trying to predetermine the outcomes of matches by how well you're doing. And depending on how good you are and you're going against the grain and you're actually overcoming this stacking of the deck, they'll continue to stack the deck until you lose a match, and they'll make it harder for your team by balancing it out so you incur the loss that you're supposed to get. And the only really way to combat that is to play in full parties, where it's hard for them to combat that because they can't find 6 sweats to go ahead and compete against your 6 sweats. So it says, in other words, all players, regardless of skill level, are more likely to experience wins and losses more proportionally, meaning that you'll have an even distribution of wins and losses. So if you get a stretch of probably 5 wins, you'll probably get a stretch of 5 losses, or it'll balance out at the end of the day so that you get closer to 1. You're going to be at the whims of the game and how they decide to help or hurt you and stack that deck with or against you. And here's another interesting part that kind of goes with what I was saying earlier. It says our data shows that lower skilled players consistently on losing end, so if they don't hand them a freebie win every once in a while, they're likely to quit matches in progress or stop playing altogether. And I think this gets compounded with our silly little armory system, where you have to get wins to unlock stuff in multiplayer. The new boys event, which one of the challenges was to get 7 wins in the LTM, the souped up playlist. Well, the problem with that is, as soon as a team started realizing that they were going to lose, people backed out. There were plenty of matches where we'd get on a good roll, and the enemy team would just completely forfeit, and the match would forfeit. So you get a freebie win. And there's other times where you knew the other team was just dominoing on your team and they were just dumpstering them. You would back out, because if it's not going to count as a win, I'm wasting my time. Let me get into the next match that may or may not have the deck stacked against me. So unfortunately, that's kind of how that works. And over time, this would have a negative impact, where there would be less bad players over time and the lobbies would get sweatier. In theory, on paper, that sounds all fine and dandy. I think based off our prior years before 2019, we had plenty of Call of Duty titles that were very healthy. So I would imagine that the player base got a little bit more upset that they were losing all the time, compared to where it was 10 years ago, where people would just take the beating and improve if they wanted. Now people take the beating and they just leave the game, and they're just like, I'm done with this game. So they change their behaviors to kind of min-max their profits, which makes sense. And they're not hiding it here. They're basically telling us plain as day, we're going to stack the deck against you so you incur a loss if you're winning too much, and vice versa. If you're having a bad day, we're going to go ahead and give you a little participation win. And unfortunately, that's how it works. And then they go, we understand sweaty players are upset that they go against sweaty players, but there's not much we can do about it. We'll think of ways, though. They're not really going to do much. They will give additional information on the ping and matchmaking. So they clarify a little bit more details, because like I said, I shouldn't get 70 ping, but sometimes I do. It's seldom, but sometimes I do. And then 40 ping, a little bit more common than the 70. And then most common, I do get about 20, and sometimes I do get 12. But why not just give me 12 all the time? I live close enough where I should get that. There's probably like a flow chart where it's like, oh, ping is this amount. Find this. Oh, couldn't find it. Go back up ping. Let's go ahead and boost the ping higher. And that's where it continues to search on a higher and higher volume. So community questions. These are common questions that they got asked about matchmaking, and they're deciding to address them. Says, did you consider engagement or time played as a factor in matchmaking? We do not consider how often or how much is played. And although at face value, I think that it's probably true because of the other factors, but generally there is a correlation. On average, people who play more are generally better at the game. So that can be kind of used as a metric in a way, even though that's not the direct metric. Does Call of Duty matchmaking process impact any in-game elements such as hit registration, player visibility, aim assist, damage, or etc.? And they said no. Matchmaking does not impact those elements. There was a patent that came out like 4 years ago. I think during World War II, we talked a lot about it. It was like a Spyro patent specifically for PvE gameplay. So this could probably apply to zombies if they wanted to utilize it. But specifically for multiplayer, it doesn't look to be the case. Even though sometimes people are like, oh my God, they only killed me. They got extra damage. My gun did no damage because they're a bot and I'm a good player. The reality is you just got dumpstered, and that's okay. You just got to accept it. And sometimes there are connectivity issues, even though connectivity is king, that can impact that. And then here's another one that anecdotally, some people have said, hey, I noticed I got easier lobbies when I bought stuff. I don't buy anything. My lobbies are particularly sweaty. So spending money, Call of Duty content such as bundle battle passes change how players are matched. It says money spent does not in any way, shape, or form factor into matchmaking. Although that may be true, I think this also goes back to this first example that I said, that typically somebody who buys the battle pass is probably more invested in the game than probably plays randomly. They will likely have more time, and they'll likely be a better player. Still have yet to see some data on that. Obviously now we don't have API, so it gets even harder to see how good your lobbies are or how not good they are. Does Call of Duty use bots in multiplayer? This kind of got spread around, and there's plenty of Call of Duty communities that are pretty gullible to believe even some stuff like this, even when they're shown that is not the case. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. I know a lot of people are like AFK farming tiers, and this kind of part of that. Do partners or content creators get special consideration in matchmaking? No. We do not change matchmaking process based on who owns the account. In specific cases though, such as for an event like Call of Duty Next or even World Series of Warzone, we may require that customize how lobbies are formed, which forces those players into a specific lobby. But that's very specific scenario. Have you considered an opt-in system? Basically, they considered it, but based off the data, they're not going to make a decision on that. Have you ever tested removing it? Overall, yeah, people just leave when they suck at the game. That's basically what they said. They're just doubling down on what they said earlier. And then if you consider removing skill from matchmaking in specific modes, we have considered in the past, we continue to examine it, which basically the data will never tell them that bad players are playing more when they're getting dumpstered. So that'll probably never change. So thank you for your feedback. So we'll have to kind of see this blog. Overall, not new information. Appreciate all the support on the content. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.